Welcome! In today's video, I'll be making an Art Deco evening dress from this pattern from Lady Marlowe, which is a late 1930s pattern. I'll be making this version here, version A, but with the back of version D1. This pattern is really cool because it has two versions of a dress, two versions of like a main dress with 3 different back details, and it has 2 evening coats you can make using the dress pattern and different sleeves, which is really cool. So a lot of bang for your buck with this pattern. This is also my first time working with silk charmeuse, so that was an experience. So I hope you enjoy. Here is the fabric I've chosen for my dress, a scarlet silk charmeuse. It has a beautiful fluid drape, perfect for this type of silky evening dress. The pattern I chose for this dress is a reproduction from Lady Marlowe Patterns. This is a reprint of a late 1930s evening dress pattern. This pattern style, however, will work for early 1940s as well. It is really simple to construct. It has a front and a back skirt piece, a front and back bodice piece, a band, a back detail, and 6 godets. You see me adding some interfacing to either side of the bodice pieces to add some stability to these areas. I then pinned the front and back pieces together. I added some ease in the cutting stage, which means that I can just slip the dress over my head. This also means that I don't need to add closures to the dress. I then sewed the seams by machine using a 3/4 inch seam allowance. Here you see me binding the edges of the seams with self-bias binding. I sewed the bias to the seam allowance right sides together, then wrapped it over and sewed again to encase the raw edge and give a nice and neat finish. I then marked the 1/4 inch hem of the neckline using some Tailor's chalk, ironed it inwards, and pinned it in place. The hem was then finished by hand. After a quick iron, the center front point was given a little square of interfacing to stabilize it. Now it was time to finish the rest of the neckline. This was done with this band detail, 1/2 of which was interfaced. Here you see how this band will attach to the dress. Before it does, however, I needed to finish the part of the band that will not be attached to the bodice. The band was sewn right sides together. The band was then turned inside out and ironed. The rest of the band was then attached to the bodice, right sides together and sewn using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Here you see me ironing the seam allowance upwards towards the band. I then turned the band inward and pinned it over the seam allowance, thus finishing it. Here is how the band looked once it was sewn down by hand. The last piece of the bodice was the back detail. I sewed the 2 details right sides together. After they were sewn, I turned the piece inside out and pressed. The ends of the detail were also pressed inwards by 3/4 inch. This is where the magic happens. I pinned the back detail to spots indicated by the pattern, looped it under and over the band, and secured it to the other side. This pulls the back down and forms a space for the arms to go through. This back detail was then secured by hand to the inside of the bodice for a seamless finish. With the bodice done, it was time to turn attention to the skirt. The only shaping in the skirt is from 2 darts located on the back piece, which you see me marking out here with tailor's chalk. After the darts were sewn, they were pressed towards the center back. Now comes the most time-consuming part of the dress, the godets. Here you see me marking out the seam allowances on the inside of the godet. I used a 3/4 inch seam allowance, so I could turn it inwards and finish the raw edge of the seam. I then cut a slit into the back piece and marked the seam allowance on either side of that as well, which is only a 1/4 inch, which would be covered by the turning inward of the larger seam allowance of the godet. I then pinned one side of the godet, offset to account for their different seam allowances. This was sewn to the top of the godet. Then I pinned the other side and sewed. When it came to the point of the godet, I treated it like a dart, sewing until I sewed off the fabric. This gave me a clean point. I then ironed the larger seam allowance of the godet over, pinned it, and sewed it by machine. Here you see the 2 back godets all finished. The exact exact same process was repeated with the front piece and front godets. Now it was time to attach the two side godets. I pinned the godets to either side of the front piece and sewed. I finished the raw edge of the seam like those of the other godets. I then pinned the back piece to the front piece and attached godet. This was then sewed. Don't be alarmed about the bottom not matching. I cut one of my godets too long. After some trial and error, I decided to bind the seam, like those of the bodice. Some self-fabric bias tape was sewn and ironed upwards. It was then pinned and sewed again, this time encasing the raw edges. Before the skirt and bodice could be attached, I had to gather the center front section of the bodice between marks indicated by the pattern. Here you see me pinning the skirt and bodice in place. This was sewn using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The seam was bound like the rest of the bodice seams. The final step of the dress was to hem it. Here you see me marking a 1/4 inch from the bottom of the skirt with tailor's chalk, after I had let it hang for a couple days. This was ironed. I then pinned some 3-inch horsehair braid to the bottom of the skirt for structure and to make the godet stand out more. The top of the braid has a string, which when pulled, curves the braid, which helped to get around the curves of the hem. Since this skirt needed a 3-inch hem to be floor length, I simply wrapped the fabric around the braid, no measuring required. After being pinned, I sewed the hem in place by hand. You could also have sewn a gathering thread to the bottom of the skirt to eliminate this puckering on the inside, but it doesn't bother me and it doesn't show from the outside. The final touch was one of my labels. Everything mentioned in the video and more in the reveal will be linked below. Thanks for watching!